Valencia'dan yeniden Adebayor, Visca, vuruşu topa ve gol!
Visca ve gol! Visca ve gol! Emre geliyor. Emre! Direkten döndü!
Hello everyone and thank you for listening to Football a la Turca. We hope you very much enjoyed our UEFA Europa League Group C preview, which of course included Trabzonspor, FC Basel, Krasnodar and Getafe. Thank you very much to Oliver Zessiger, Will Baumgartner, Alexander Johnson and Jakub Marofolo for their insights on the Group C participants. If you haven't checked that out yet, please go and download that and listen to it. I highly recommend it. I would like to say that my editing on that episode wasn't 100% how I wanted it to be. I promise that the next episodes will be a little bit cleaner. I just wanted to get that episode out as quick as possible, and I wanted to start with a big team. And because of the fact that we were releasing a big transfer episode on the Black Eagles podcast the day after for Beşiktaş, I didn't want to start off with Beşiktaş, so I started off with Trabzonspor, because obviously that's going to attract a little bit more interest than probably Başakşehir's group will, although you never know. So, release cadence today, the 9th of September, we're releasing our Group J preview, which of course includes Başakşehir, AS Roma, Borussia Mönchengladbach and Wolfsberger from Austria. Then on the 12th, we are releasing our Group K preview, which includes Beşiktaş, SC Braga, Wolverhampton Wanderers and Slovan Bratislava. But please note that episode will drop exclusively on the Black Eagles feed. So that means you'll have to head over to my other podcast that I do together with Sinan Schwarting on Beşiktaş exclusively. You'll have to go and check out that feed, the Black Eagles podcast. If you type in the Black Eagles podcast or just Beşiktaş in iTunes or in any podcast related apps, you should find the Black Eagles podcast as one of the first things that pops up. And we will of course once that episode releases, you can check out our social media accounts and we'll be sharing that too. But that episode will be dropping exclusively on the Black Eagles podcast feed. Then on the 15th we will finish up with Galatasaray's Champions League preview. Of course, Galatasaray are in a very tough group with Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain and Club Brugge. We're talking to Jonathan Johnson from Paris Saint-Germain, Ben Hayward for Real Madrid and Guillaume Mabe for Club Brugge. And then of course our very own Özür Dinger for Galatasaray. The reason that the Galatasaray episode is dropping last is, well, it's probably the most, without any argument, actually the most attractive of the groups. But also, that's not the only reason, also because of scheduling. I still have one interview left to do, and that's for Group A in the Champions League for Galatasaray's group. So that's why it'll be released last. So Galatasaray fans, your waiting will be rewarded, your patience will be rewarded. But please hold on a couple more days on, Sunday or Saturday, that episode will release. And I promise you will enjoy it, if only for the very special intro I devised for that episode. Of course, as you may have noticed, the Trabzonspor and Başakşehir, and of course also our Beşiktaş episode, will have a very special intro specifically made for those teams. So I hope you enjoy those if you're a fan of the team. Now, without further ado, we're going to move over to our Group J preview, which of course includes AS Roma from Pot 1. We spoke to John Solano for AS Roma. Then Borussia Mönchengladbach from Pot 2. We spoke to Ronan Murphy for Borussia Mönchengladbach. Then we spoke to Bruno Bottaro for Başakşehir. And finally, Martin Shauhuber for Wolfsberger from Austria. I hope you'll enjoy this episode, and if you do and you would like to consider supporting the podcast, head over to www.patreon.com/FALT, F-A-L-T, and you can pledge your support for $3 or $10 a month, and I promise you that all that money will be used to improve the podcast going forward. But of course, you are not obligated to do so. You can always just enjoy the podcast for free, but if you would like to support us in a way, that's one of the ways you can. Other ways you can support the podcast: just give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share with your friends and family, and just spread the word. The more we grow as a show, the the more shows like this we can do with really expert guests. And once again, before we get started, I would just like to thank all our guests from last week, from this episode, and from our upcoming episodes once again. They all sacrificed their own personal time to come and speak to us about these teams. They aren't getting paid for this, neither are we, of course. All the money we get from Patreon goes straight into our hosting and all that kind of stuff. But these people gave their free time to come in on the show and discuss these teams. And obviously for many of them, that's just purely out of passion too. But most of these guys are professional journalists, or girls are professionals, and they do this for a living too. So a way you can show your appreciation for them is go and follow them on Twitter. Their Twitter handles will be in the show notes, and also, of course, of our last week's episode, their Twitter handles are in the show notes. Go and follow these folks and let them know that you heard them on Football a la Turca and that you liked what they had to say. Now, without further ado, here's Group J of the Europa League, starting off with AS Roma. So from pot 1, the head honchos in this group, AS Roma, of course, the Italian giants. And here to talk to us about AS Roma is John Solano, who is an Italian football journalist, editor of RomaPress.net, and of course, one of the hosts of the Serie A show with Chloe Beresford and Nima Tavalai. It's a great show if you're interested in Italian football. I highly recommend it. John, thank you very much for joining us on the show and giving your insights on AS Roma.
Absolutely happy to be here.
So, John, let's get into it straight away. AS Roma last season in Serie A, how did they manage to qualify for the Europa League? Did they get a group stage spot straight away, or did they actually have to play qualifiers?
So initially, they were set to play in the qualifiers. However, AC Milan, who finished ahead of them in the Serie A table, they have been having problems, just like Roma, with financial fair play over the last few seasons. However, Milan's problems were so prevalent that they had to exclude themselves from the European competition. So this led to Roma going from the qualifying stage into the group stage, and then Torino not being in the competition at all, going into the qualifier stage. Now they recently crashed out to Premier League side Wolves. So Roma, Lazio, they are the ones currently flying the flag, so to speak, for the Serie A in the Europa League.
And of course, there's these eras of players where, for example, at Real Madrid we speak about the post-Ronaldo era. At Barcelona, at some point, we'll surely be talking about the post-Leo Messi era. But at AS Roma, of course, it's the post-Totti era. He's been retired for 2 years now, if I'm not mistaken. But still,
Yes.
It's very much the post-Totti era has begun. New stars are rising, one of which is, of course, former Başakşehir player Cengiz Ünder. I believe he's currently injured, but hopefully it's just a small injury. Can you tell us a little bit more about Cengiz's role in the team and the other key players of AS Roma right now?
Yeah, so Ünder is one of, if not the most important player in Roma. You could easily make that argument. Unfortunately, we just found out today he could miss the next month. He could be out because of an injury to his right thigh that he suffered while on national team duty. Roma are already really hampered by injuries. Starting winger Diego Perotti is out for the next 2 months. Leonardo Spinazzola, who was acquired from Juve really early in the summer, the left back, he is also injured. So Roma, they're 2 matches into the season and they're already having to deal with many injuries, and the history of injuries at Roma is not very kind. I think they've had upwards of 15 to 16 torn ACLs in the last 5 years. So it's an ugly and brutal history. But as for the rest of the team, it's interesting to see because Roma underwent so many changes this past summer. I think we're still learning who are the most important pieces within this new Roma of Paulo Fonseca. Certainly, Edin Dzeko, you could easily make the case as being the most important, probably right alongside there with Ünder Dzeko was a guy who was linked with a move away from Roma all summer. Everybody read the headlines. He was very close to joining Inter, and then he ultimately decided to renew his contract with Roma. He's been very, very good in these 2 matches this season for the Giallorossi. And then Pau Lopez. Listen, last year, Roma finished outside of a Champions League place because they had a very, very poor goalkeeper in Robin Lopez, and he was the one slated to replace Alisson, who everybody knows is at Liverpool now. And in my almost 25 years of watching Roma consistently, I don't think I've ever seen a bigger downgrade in terms of talent or a bigger drop-off in quality in my life from when Roman Monchi decided to sell Alisson to Liverpool and bring in Robin Olsen. So Pau Lopez, he's done very well in these first 2 matches, very good with the ball at his feet. So if I had to pick a few players who were probably the most key and important pieces of the Giallorossi, I would probably say Under, Dzeko, and Pau Lopez. We'll see in the coming weeks if maybe that changes. A lot of the talk has been around their recent additions of Chris Smalling from Manchester United, Henrik Mkhitaryan from Arsenal. Certainly these 2 names will be put into the starting 11 of Fonseca. It remains to be seen how they adapt to a new league, new language, new style of football. But for now, if I had to pick 3, I would say Dzeko, Under, Pau Lopez is the big 3 and most important pieces to date for Roma.
One of the other big pieces that left this summer, Konstantinos Manolas, who went to Napoli, has he been properly replaced?
No, I mean, listen, my general feeling from the summer calciomercato is new sporting director Gianluca Petracchi had a lot of work to do. I don't think it can be understated that Roman Monchi, and I'll try to be kind because he's an extremely sensitive guy and I don't want to be too harsh. Monchi really decimated Roma to a point where you could easily make the case that he set Roma back 2, maybe 3 seasons just because the new sporting director has to get rid of so many of these players. Listen, he got rid of Robin Olsen, who arrived a year ago. He got rid of Steven Nzonzi, who arrived a year ago. He got rid of Ante Coric, who arrived a year ago. Maxime Gonalon, who arrived in the first summer of Monchi. He had a lot of cleaning up to do, and there was only so much he could get done, in my opinion. And for me, from my standpoint, one of the biggest regrets was they did not go for a central defender of more quality. Listen, Chris Smalling comes from a big team, obviously, a big league, but it remains to be seen if he can adapt to the Serie A. Premier League is much more physical, much quicker than the Serie A, where defenses sit back, more tactical. So I can't sit here and say that Smalling is the perfect replacement for Manolas. Now, Manolas, like many of the players at Roma, had a very poor season last season. You could probably say it was his worst season since he arrived at the club in the summer of 2014. So do I think he was properly replaced? No, but we have to wait and see what Chris Smalling does, because I think he's the most important key to all of this. Roma did bring in Gianluca Mancini, who did very well at Atalanta last season. Very good with the ball at his feet, very highly rated, playing for the Azzurri already, the Italian national team. So maybe he could be the one who takes the torch from Manolas, but no, I don't think to date that he was properly replaced. Obviously, the biggest unknown, though, is Smalling. Maybe he does better than many of us anticipate, but I have to say, from my standpoint, my expectations aren't incredibly high for him, but maybe he will surprise us.
Yeah, I have to say I was very surprised when I saw the news of Chris Smalling going to AS Roma, because he's been one of those English players that have been kind of marginalized by the fans in recent history. At Manchester United, it was a little puzzling for me to see a guy like that being brought in at a big club as AS Roma to replace someone as Manolas, who is a high-profile player. But there's one move over the summer that in particular will interest most of our listeners, and that's the one of Merchetin from Gençlerbirliği, a very under-the-radar player, so to speak. I know he's been scouted by Beşiktaş last year. They were interested in him, but the asking price was a little too much to their liking for a second division player at the time. But he's moved to AS Roma now. He hasn't played yet, but are you hearing any rumblings from his performances in training or anything like that?
Yeah, so actually, I mentioned Diego Perotti earlier, and it was actually Cetin who was the one who injured him in training. And a lot of, or I should say, many fans they don't like Diego Perotti so much because he's injured, has been really absent from the team for these last 2 or 3 seasons. So a lot of the, we'll say, more harsh Roma supporters sort of had a soft spot for Cetin after he injured Perotti. Listen, I think he is one of those guys who can surprise people. And I only say that because new sporting director of Roma, Gianluca Petracchi, has an incredible history at buying young defenders. If you look at the Torino team that he left this past season, I mean, Torino's defenders, I could probably pick 2 or 3 that immediately slot into the starting 11 at Roma. Inkulu, Izzo, Lianco, who did very, very well last season while on loan at Bologna. Petracchi has this very interesting and very good eye for young talent, but particularly in defense. And I do think Cetin is going to get an opportunity because, listen, right now Roma have 5 central defenders, and Juan Jesus has not been good in the first match against Genoa. Roma drew 3-3. Juan Jesus was terrible, frankly. You could easily make the case the worst one on the pitch. And then you have Federico Fazio, who is getting older. He renewed his contract for an additional season, but Roma like him more so for his personality and his leadership in the dressing room, more so necessarily than his performances. So that really leaves Mancini, Smalling, and then you have Cetin. And in my opinion, he is going to get an opportunity. He will absolutely get an opportunity. Now, I think Roma will be careful with him. New language, new environment, a fan base that is very, very has high expectations. I've always maintained that outside of Real Madrid, Roma is probably the most difficult environment in all of Europe, just because you have a fan base who wants to win so bad, but has expectations that you would think the club is like Juve or Milan or Inter. So he's going to get opportunities. He absolutely will. I think Roma learned a lot from when Under arrived. I think what they did with him was perfect. They eased him in. He didn't really start playing until about his 3rd or 4th month into the season. January 2018 is really when he came on. And I think Roma are going to take a very similar approach with Cetin. I think they're going to allow him to adapt. They're not going to put much pressure on him. They're not going to count on him for the time being. But I think when we see November, December, January come around, the winter arrives, who knows where Roma are with the Europa League? Who knows, given their injury history, what the team looks like? I think he is going to get opportunities. Petracchi spoke very highly of him. So it seems like they're going to ease him in, and I think that's the right approach. And I think with what they did with Under, that would be the right approach to take, and that's the route I think they will go with him. There's no doubting that they need help at central defender. We just talked about how they didn't replace Manolas. Who knows? Maybe Cetin could be this guy who surprises everybody, which I think seems to be the feeling amongst most Roma supporters for him. From a physical standpoint, he certainly seems to have all the tools. I think it's adapting to a bigger league, and especially the Serie A. It's a particular league. It's slower. It's tactical. So let's see how he adapts. But I have a feeling he will get his opportunities. If you had to ask me right now, I wouldn't be shocked if at the end of the season we saw 15 appearances to his name, because I do think he's going to get an opportunity. I absolutely do.
And of course, with the success of Cengiz Ünder and Mehdi Demiral in the Serie A, maybe more Turkish players will come flowing in if Mercetin does well too.
Of course.
But let's move forward with the coach, Paulo Fonseca. You've already spoken briefly about him before. I believe he started with the job at the beginning of this season, right? Or did he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
he arrived in June.
So new coach. Maybe it's a little difficult, but what do you feel are his plans for this Roma? How is he planning to have them play, pretty much? What's his philosophy?
Very attacking, very, very attacking. We've seen it. If you want to get a taste of what AS Roma 2019-2020 looks like, I would just watch the highlights from Roma 3, Genoa 3. Now, that scoreline, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily reflect the actual match. I believe Genoa's expected goals were 1.1 in that match, but Juan Jesus, who is not a good player, decided to continue not being a good player and gave away a stupid penalty, made a massive mistake. So Roma ended up drawing. But if you just watch highlights, you can easily get a taste of what this Roma is. Pressing, a lot of it, very high up the pitch, committing a lot of men forward, playing a very high defensive line. That's the easiest way I can summarize this Roma. Very attacking, in a way sort of similar to what we saw from the Roma that made the Champions League semi-final. But the football of Paulo Fonseca is certainly more direct, I would say, than what we saw from Eusebio Di Francesco, who liked to play very vertical, which led to problems and a lack of success in the Serie A, because when you have defenses sitting back, that necessarily doesn't work out too well. While Paulo Fonseca, you have a lot of men committing forward. You have them holding onto the ball. They like possession. So I think that's what we're going to see a lot of. Again, for me, the biggest question mark is, do these players fit what Fonseca wants? I still think we have a lot of question marks. When you mention a high defensive line, Federico Fazio, who has been a first-choice defender for 3 or 4 seasons now for Roma, I would say putting him in a high line isn't exactly the most correct thing to do. He's extremely slow. Now, he's good on the ball, very good on the ball, but we have to wait and see if Roma get punished from putting him in the starting formation constantly like they've been doing. Perhaps that's where Smalling can come in and replace him. But yeah, I think we're going to see a very attacking-minded Roma, which is something we've seen for the past few seasons, just different variations of it. We saw it with Luciano Spalletti. We saw it with the aforementioned Eusebio Di Francesco. So I think this is a similar mindset of an attacking football, but approach is a bit different.
So basically a team that could really overwhelm their opponents, but at the same time have some proneness at the back, is what you're saying, and also what we could see from maybe the Genoa game, despite...
Yeah, absolutely. The defense is going to be the biggest question mark that surrounds Roma this entire season, and there's going to be no way around it. Given, again, that they like to commit so many men forward, this Roma will live and die by the defense. Scoring goals, in my opinion, will be no issue. It will be, will they be able to, we call it suffer a little bit, the way we describe it in Italy, will they be able to suffer from teams hitting them on the break? Because we saw against Genoa, Lazio hit the woodwork 4 times this past weekend in the Derby della Capitale. So Roma are prone at the back. They can absolutely be had at the back. It's simply a question of, are their defenders up to it? Do they have the quality? I've mentioned the central defenders, but there's also been problems with Alessandro Florenzi on the right. Roma brought in Davide Zappacosta from Chelsea. he got injured as well this past weekend during the warm-up before the match against Lazio. So Florenzi had to step into the starting formation. So there's a lot of question marks at the back for Roma. And when you couple Fonseca's style of play with the questions of quality and fit into the style of play of Fonseca for these players at Roma, I think, again, the defense really is the biggest question mark, and I do think they can be exploited at the back.
And then let's talk a little bit about your expectations for the group. Roma are obviously the main favorites in this group, but Borussia Mönchengladbach are definitely a tough opponent. Wolfsberger are a bit of an unknown, and I'm sure Başakşehir are a bit of an unknown too, even though Roma have obviously had scouts in Istanbul in the recent couple of years. But what are your expectations for the final standings after 6 match days, and do you think AS Roma are going to take the Europa League serious? Because I believe it's been a little bit of an issue in the past where the Europa League hasn't been a major priority for the club.
Yeah, it's really been a problem too for the most of Serie A. We have a lot of Serie A teams who prefer to just concentrate on the league, and they sort of just punt this European competition, which we've seen in the last season or two, where the Italian teams start to take it a bit more serious, and that has helped a little bit in terms of the ranking in UEFA. But I do think Roma are going to take it serious, because we've heard from Pizzaghi, Fonseca, they seem to be making this competition a priority, which is not something, to be honest, that Roma supporters are used to. As you just mentioned, this has usually been a team that, when it comes to the Europa League, if it comes to concentrating on the Europa League or getting a Champions League place, which we saw during the season of Luciano Spalletti when Roma crashed out of the Europa League to Lyon. Roma have showed in the past that they tend to give more priority to qualifying for a Champions League place. Now, I can't necessarily criticize them too much for that. Roma is a team that lives and dies by Champions League revenue. Roma, their financial situation is very particular. It's very sensitive. They need Champions League money, and every season they are out of that competition, they risk financial implications from the top down. So I understand why Roma have prioritized the league in recent seasons, but I do think, given from what we've heard from everybody, that they're going to make it a priority. Now, as you just mentioned, I do think they have a difficult group. Roma, except for maybe the last season or two, they always tend to get drawn into these very, very difficult groups, whether it's the Europa League or the Champions League. So I don't think this is going to be easy. And Roma, even in the Champions League, they suffer away from home. Cluj comes to mind, where Roma, they face these smaller teams, but they still really suffer. They still don't play well. So listen, they have to go to Istanbul. They have to go to Austria. They have to go to Germany. These are not easy places to play. Now, I do expect Roma to finish at the top of the group. I do expect them to obviously pass the turn and go to the knockouts. But I by no means think this is going to be easy for them. And I'm very curious to see who potentially joins Roma from the group in the knockouts, because I think Başakşehir could be very dangerous. Mönchengladbach, very good team from Germany. We have to wait and see. It's a very particular group. When we saw sort of this draw, I think Roma felt very hard done to an extent, because, again, they've had very, very bad luck in recent seasons in both competitions, Europa League and the Champions League, when it comes to their draw. And I think they were hoping for a much easier group. So I don't think this is going to be easy by any means. And while I do think they will pass the turn, finish at the top, if you were to tell me that Roma would finish third and not qualify, I would not even be remotely surprised, because this is a team where you just don't know what to expect from them when it comes to European competitions. You have no idea. Nobody expected them to go to the Champions League semi-final under Eusebio Di Francesco and lose to Liverpool by 1 goal and be 1 goal away from the Champions League final. Nobody expected that. On the other hand, nobody expected them to lose 7-1 to Bayern Munich, 6-2 to Barcelona. You don't know what to expect from this team. And I know those results, they're 3 or 4 years apart, but this has been Roma throughout their entire history. Roma lose to Manchester United 7-1 a decade ago. It's truly a sickness at this club. You do not know what is going to happen, particularly in Europe with them. So while I do think they finish at the top, if you were to tell me Roma finished third, they don't qualify, I would not even be the least bit surprised, because again, this is Roma. They either exceed your expectations or they fall much short of your expectations. So you really, if you're a Roma supporter, you really have to be prepared for anything.
That sounds, those emotions sound very familiar as a Beşiktaş fan, John, let me tell you. That's it for my football-related questions. The final question I always ask our guests when it comes to these European previews is, do you have any travel tips for fans from Başakşehir, Wolfsberger, Borussia Mönchengladbach who decide to make the trip to Rome to visit the away game?
Oh, travel tips. The one I always give to anybody, even when it's not a European competition, getting to the Stadio Olimpico is not easy. The public transport in Rome is terrible, as I'm sure anybody who lives in a big, big metropolitan area can probably attest. But Rome is especially bad. So I would plan accordingly, and everybody asks for restaurants as well. There are just so many that I can't even begin to recommend one. But there is one that a former Roma player, Vinci Candela, opened some years ago. It's called Qui e Ora is the name of it, Here and Now. And Candela is there often, and if you ask him to sign a shirt, an autograph, he's actually very kind with his time. So that would be one recommendation I could give. But no, if you are traveling, be prepared. Give yourself plenty of time. If you're running late, I would try and walk very fast because again, getting to the Olimpico is terrible. It's dreadful. I can't complain about it enough. I've done it so many times. I'm used to it by now, but if you're visiting for the first time, leave yourself plenty of opportunity and time to get to the stadium, because it's a mess and the public transport is terrible, which is one of the main reasons why Roma are looking to get a new stadium and why they've been in talks for so many years to actually start building their new stadium. But yeah, if you haven't been to the Olimpico, give yourself plenty of time. That's the one piece of advice I can give, because it's getting there is not easy, nor is it fun, because between the traffic, the public transport, always running late, give yourself plenty of time. That way you can enjoy.
Thank you, John Solano, and everyone, please check out Serie A show with Chloe and Nima as well. It's a great show, especially if you're interested in keeping up to date on everything Italian football. And from pot 2 in Group J, we have Borussia Mönchengladbach. A tough draw for sure. One of the stronger teams in pot 2, I'd wager. And joining us live right now is Ronan Murphy, Bundesliga expert for goal.com. Ronan, thank you very much for joining us.
You're most welcome. Your pronunciation of Borussia Mönchengladbach was a bit better than my Irish accent pronunciation.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. So Borussia Mönchengladbach are coached by Marco Rose, a German coach. But we'll talk a little bit more about him in a bit. But first, let's talk a little bit about how Mönchengladbach managed to get into the Europa League. So they have had a 2-year absence, I believe, from Europe. I believe last time they played Europa League football was still when Turca was having great times at Gladbach. But no qualifiers had to be played. They qualified directly through the league. How did Borussia Mönchengladbach fare in the Bundesliga last season, and how did they get to the Europa League group stages?
Yes, so they almost got to the Champions League, actually. Unfortunately, the last game of the season, they were playing Borussia Dortmund, and had they perhaps won that by a big scoreline, they would have got into the Champions League, but they lost 2-0. And then, as well, the team that got in, Bayer Leverkusen, they had a big 5-win win, which meant they had a much better goal difference, and they ended up finishing 3 points ahead. So the last day of the season in the Bundesliga was quite interesting, because there was a battle for fourth, and there was kind of a battle for all 3 Europa League places. So despite Gladbach losing the final game, they secured 5th spot, so that was enough to get automatic qualification into the group stage as the best German team in the Europa League this season.
And I previously mentioned him just now, Turca, of course. I believe he joined Borussia Dortmund now. He was a really big name. Well, of course, thanks to his brother too, but a fantastic player. But Borussia Mönchengladbach aren't really a team that have necessarily really big names that I think will stand out to most people. But can you point out a few of their more key players that people really will be familiar with, or should just simply watch out for, except for Sommer, I think, is probably the most famous one that I can think of, just glancing at the squad.
Yeah, Sommer probably is the most famous, and rightly so, because he is a very talented goalkeeper. He's probably one of the best goalkeepers in the Bundesliga, so it's no surprise. And he's such an important player for Switzerland as well. He will be key for them getting far in the Europa League, because he's such a good goalkeeper, and the further they go, I suppose, the more pressure they'll be under. But looking to replace Hazard, who went to Dortmund, like you said, they brought in Marcus Thuram, and his surname might be familiar to some of your listeners, and that's because he is the son of Lilian Thuram, the former France World Cup winner. So he has huge pedigree. He's yet to score for Borussia Mönchengladbach since moving from League in the summer, but a lot is expected of him and fellow French forward Alassane Plea. So they kind of will be important in the group stage, and hopefully they can get a good partnership going maybe in the Bundesliga before they start playing in Europe, because they've kind of yet to really gel properly. But it's early days for them, and it's early days for the new coach Marco Rose as well.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit more about that coach Marco Rose, a new coach, so it's maybe a little bit difficult, but can you tell us a little bit more of the type of football he likes to play, and what is he trying to implement at Borussia Mönchengladbach?
Yeah, so he's moved to Gladbach from Red Bull Salzburg, where he was really successful. He was a youth coach there, and he won the UEFA Youth League, and because of that, he was given the chance maybe to manage the senior side, and he won the league in 2 seasons in a row, and he won the double last season, so he was highly in demand, and a lot of German teams were looking at bringing him back to Germany, because he was born in Leipzig. So Borussia Mönchengladbach were the team that eventually did get him, and were able to replace their manager with him, and they have high hopes for him. He's an attacking coach. He's a kind of an analytical coach. And his assistant at Gladbach, and his assistant that he brought from Salzburg, René Maric, he's known for his backstory of being a tactics blogger turned coach. So it's kind of an interesting background there, and they both are kind of very tactically minded. So he's trying to implement a kind of 4-4-2 diamond, or a 4-3-1-2 at the moment. A very kind of vertical approach. They don't give the opposition a lot of space in the middle of the park. They try to win the ball back quickly, and then attack through vertical balls or diagonal balls across the pitch, and try to open up space that way. So it's slow coming around so far, but it's still early days, because he's only played 3 games in the Bundesliga, and 1 win, 1 draw, and 1 defeat. So it's kind of level at the moment. But Borussia Mönchengladbach will be hoping that they can pick up more wins, obviously, and get back into Europe again this season.
The word laptop coach springs to mind when I hear all that.
Yeah, he definitely is, and that's kind of something that Maric, his assistant especially, is kind of tarnished with. But I think that they're a bit more than that. They're very player focused, and Rosa especially, he doesn't mind maybe players making mistakes. He knows that there's room for individuality, and there's room for error with the players. So he's not kind of one of these managers that comes out after matches and he won't go harshly on a player in the media. He'll put the arm around his shoulder, and he's kind of a people person. So I think he's blending the two aspects of management well so far.
Like you said, like that type of coaching, I think it tends to have a slow start, but it's something where if the club and the fans have the patience, it's usually somewhere they're going to reap the rewards of that, because it's implementing a system, a proper system. It's not just playing based on, individual quality, but there's a proper organizational system, fundamentals being implemented, and that's going to, hopefully for Borussia Mönchengladbach, pay off dividends in the future. Let's talk a little bit about their strengths and weaknesses. So if you would have to say, it's difficult, I know, with a new coach, it's always tough, and also with, Turca leaving, a new young player being brought in to replace him from, I think he came from Guingamp, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I wasn't going to pronounce it, but yeah, I'll let you do it.
Well, I cheated because I recently interviewed somebody about them, so that's how I knew. But what would you highlight as their strengths as a team, but also what are the things that, for example, Roma, Wolfsberger and Başakşehir are going to want to look to exploit?
I think they have a strong midfield at the moment, and maybe that's something that hasn't really changed from last year, because they have Dennis Zakaria in midfield, and he kind of picked up the mantle of where Granit Xhaka, the now Arsenal midfielder, left off, because they kind of, there's a big similarity between the two players. They're kind of defensive midfielders, hard working, tough tackling sort of players, and
and Swiss
they're
too,
both,
I think, right?
They're both Swiss, yes, exactly. Yeah. So and they have similar enough surnames. So I think that there's some sort of similarity there in the way they play, and the fact that one is a Gladbach player and one used to be a Gladbach player. So I think they do have a strong midfield, and that will kind of tell in the matches that they won't kind of concede possession a lot. They'll have a lot of the ball, and then hopefully they can get it forward to the forwards. Maybe the weak link at the moment could be Fabian Johnson playing on the wing when he does play, or sometimes plays as a fullback, the American international. He hasn't really impressed so far this season, and he's yet to play a full match, and he was taken off again at the weekend, and in whatever he was on the pitch, 70 minutes or something, he didn't really produce a lot. And Laszlo Benes came off the bench after returning on loan, and he had started the previous couple of games. He had been at Holstein Kiel, and he came back and he came off the bench, and he kind of made a difference and got them back into the game against Leipzig with a great cross for Mbolo to finish. So I think maybe he is the weak link if he is playing, but whether Rosa is going to stick with him is a different question, because he just hasn't been that impressive in this new setup yet. Maybe he's just taking time to adjust to it, like you were saying.
And what are your expectations for this group when we look at the teams in it? Roma, of course, are a big club, Mönchengladbach too. Başakşehir haven't had a lot of European success, and Wolfsberger are kind of an unknown. If I were to ask you to predict the final standings of this group, what would be your answer?
Yeah, I think maybe the way the seeding goes might end up being reflective of how the group finishes up, because Roma will probably defeat everybody, or Gladbach might be lucky to take a point or maybe get a win at home, but it's going to be hard for the three other teams to actually do anything against Roma, because they have such a European pedigree and they are such a strong team, and we've seen them get far in the Champions League in recent years. So the Europa League definitely is a tournament that they should be kind of looking to win, not just progress in the group, but to maybe go all the way. So I think that could be the way the group finishes up, and it could be a battle for third between Başakşehir and Wolfsberger. So apologies if I've murdered the pronunciation of that there.
No, that's fine. Başakşehir, but it was fine. Nobody cares. They don't have any fans anyway. If it was Beşiktaş, then people would care, But
yeah, I'm more familiar with hearing their name pronounced on television, and pronounced badly by UK and Irish commentators too.
Well, thank you very much, Ronan Murphy, Bundesliga expert of Goal.com. We'll be continuing our Group J preview with Başakşehir coming up next. And from pot 3 is Turkey's very own Istanbul Başakşehir, coached by Okan Buruk. And joining us right now is Bruno Bottaro to tell us a little bit more about Başakşehir. Bruno, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So Bruno, let's immediately delve into it. How did Başakşehir manage to qualify for the group stages? First and foremost, please tell us a little bit more about their campaign last season, how they qualified for Europe, and then how they ended up qualifying for the group stages of the Europa League.
Yeah, Başakşehir needs a little bit of context because it's a different kind of club from the others in Turkey. It's not like that kind of super fan cultures, that kind of heated culture, that welcome to hell culture, for example. If you go to Galatasaray, Fenerbahce or Beşiktaş, that's completely different because this is a club founded in 2014, and at the same time we're talking about a club that had like the title in their hands last year, because the club was literally dominating the season. They were up, I think, even for 8 points up in front of Galatasaray. But what happened in the second part of the season was a terrible nightmare for the club, because they literally lost their form in every kind of match. They lost a lot of matches against teams that were fighting against the relegation. So, like decisive matches against Sivasspor and Göztepe, they lost a lot of points, and they managed to keep Galatasaray in the race, which was really, really difficult because all the other Turkish clubs had issues last year. And at the last match days, I think at 2 match days until the end, there was a big match between Galatasaray and Başakşehir. Başakşehir went up against Galatasaray, but in the second half they lost also that match. So they lost the league, and basically they ended up seconds with a few points to Galatasaray, and that is a huge problem for Başakşehir because their aim in the last years was to win the league, and they never managed to do that. So even their coach Abdullah Avcı decided to part ways with the club and to leave for Beşiktaş. And Başakşehir remained without their only one coach they had since 2014. So now this is year zero for Başakşehir. They decided to call Okan Buruk. Okan Buruk, a former also Inter Milan player. He was coaching Rizespor and did a massive campaign for them. And in the last years, he has proven to be one of the most interesting coaches in Turkey. And he was personally chosen probably also by Abdullah Avcı and the management of the club, because he's the kind of manager that is closest to the vision that the former manager Abdullah Avcı had, because he was working with him with the Turkish national team in 2011. So we are talking about a coach that might be very interesting in a long-term perspective. But in a short-term perspective, what Başakşehir did in the summer against Olympiacos for the Champions League first stage was far from being impressive, because we're talking about a match that was dominated by Olympiacos, and Başakşehir missed many chances actually, but they proved to be not superior to Olympiacos. Their crucial player, is now 29 years old, is Edin Visca. He's a Bosnian winger, and he did not impress in those qualifiers. So the club now needs to move further from the static tactics of the last period, and they need to build something new. This is year zero for them, so that's the first time they change the coach, and it's quite weird to say that for a football club, especially in Turkey, but that's the first real big change for them. So now they need to build from scratch, and the age of the team also last year has been a huge problem, because this was the oldest team in Europe, I believe, and this is not getting any younger, because they bought Martin Shauhuber. He's 34 years old, just like in the last days they did that. So I think in the deadline day they did that, and the player was actually sent away from Atalanta because of physical issues, and now they bought him. They also bought Mehmet Topal, who is 33 years old, and in the midfield they already had Mahmut Tekdemir is 31 and Gökhan İnler is 35. So this is quite an old team still, and the management didn't have the chance to get so many young players. One is Okechukwu Azubuike. He's a Nigerian midfielder. He's 22. But they didn't have the chance to buy many players. Much of their season depends, I think, on the new strikers. They also have Başakşehir. Dembaba is 34 years old. A lot of old players. This can be an issue if you're facing very dynamic teams like Borussia Mönchengladbach in the Europa League group, because just two teams will be passing from this group, and we have Borussia Mönchengladbach and Roma, which they are clearly stronger than Başakşehir and clearly more dynamic. So this is an issue for Başakşehir, and they will need to solve a few riddles, I believe. The first riddle is probably the striker, the main striker. They need a target man they didn't have in the last year. They paid quite a lot. The form of Emmanuel Adebayor that was not anymore so continuous. So also Robinho is 35 years old. So his form was peaking in the first part of the season with Sivasspor, but at the end of the season he was quite tired. Sometimes all the responsibilities were on him, and he didn't get the team to perform at maximum. So they missed a target man terribly. So they bought two strikers. One is Enzo Crivelli. He came from, I think, Caen in France. And the other is Fredrik Gulbrandsen from Red Bull Salzburg. They are two quite unknown strikers for many people, especially in Turkey. But Crivelli has already proven to be quite an interesting signing, in my opinion. He needs to be the one that puts the game to another level. Because if he doesn't perform well, the club will have a lot of problems. They are relying on him for a lot of the season they are expecting. Because we all can see like other players that have been a huge delusion for the club. The massive delusion, I believe, has been Arda Turan. Because Arda Turan came from Barcelona with a lot of expectation, and they didn't perform not even close to the level of Atletico Madrid or Galatasaray in his career. He was more famous for a scene that saw him throwing a sock to a referee, and he was banned for a lot of games after that scene. So actually that was pretty embarrassing for a club that was fighting for the title. And they lost the title in that year against Galatasaray once again. And so they lost the title against Besiktas in the year before. So it's 3 years they are losing the titles. And even though in the seasons against Besiktas they had a worthy opponent, in the seasons against Galatasaray, the last two seasons, they were their own reason for failure, I believe. Because they started to feel quite bad starting from March. The pressure, this club can't handle the pressure. This is the history that tells it. So, because they don't have a massive bunch of fans, which is a huge part of the discussion usually when people talk about Başakşehir. Because there are 2K fans on average every league match, and also in Europe they don't manage to get huge crowds to Başakşehir. And I've lived in Istanbul for a summer, so I know that it's quite difficult to get to Başakşehir. I was living in the center of the city, or at least near the center of the city, near Turkey, and to get to Başakşehir, it would have taken me at least 2 hours or almost 3 hours at rush hour. So that was really a problem for somebody like me that wanted to see like live match at their stadium, as I was a curious kind of person. But even if I can think about Istanbul residents, that is not something that they would usually do. But if I take like the center of the city out of this mindset, I can think that Başakşehir is a huge district now. It's like, I think 100,000 people at least. So we're talking about a district that is big as much as my original city, Bergamo in Italy. So they have a big potential, but at the same time they don't have the tradition. So a lot of people that are living there are already supporting Galatasaray, Fenerbahçe, Beşiktaş, and other teams. And so this is a difficult job they have as club, because they were starting to be a very hated club the team of the municipality, and they kind of destroyed that team of the municipality stuff in order not to have political ties, at least officially. But everybody knows that they have political ties, at least their president. So it's a difficult job they have. And when I went there, they tried to explain me that they wanted to make it different. They wanted to have this kind of children project. So they were relying on children that were born in Başakşehir and raised there. So they could have been the first new Başakşehir supporters. They have a kind of school of they organize activities for children inside the stadium. That's pretty interesting. Also, Galatasaray have that kind of section in the Turk Telecom Stadium. So it's something that in Turkey is not I think outshined. It's pretty interesting because Turkey has always had this kind of soft spot for children. And that's the same happening for Başakşehir, but it's a difficult project because when the political party will fall, what was going to happen with the club? This is a huge question they still have to answer, and it will take years to know, but probably we will know. I think in the meantime, we have to analyze what will happen this year because there are a couple of players that can change the game, at least for the moment. The first I would bet on is Daniel Aleksic. They just bought him, and he was a vital player for Yeni Malatyaspor, a kind of Turkish outsider that last year managed to qualify for Europa League. And he's one of the most interesting players, I think, in their kind of tactical game because they just sold Massimo Soro to Göztepe and Stefano Napoleoni to Göztepe. They were two great backups, and this team needed new players in the offensive midfielder spots. They bought two players in the deadline days. They are Berkayus Can from Hamburg and Daniel Aleksic from Malatyaspor, not literally from Malatyaspor because he's from Al Ahly from Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, but he's mostly known in Turkey for his time at Yeni Malatyaspor. So they have these new signings, but this is a difficult ride, I think, because we're talking about a club that has a lot of question marks, like their fans, their tactical mindset after a new coach change, and also a squad that is still quite old. And all these players that have already passed their prime, they probably will not perform at their best. And even other players like Epureanu that were massively important in the last years, they are getting older. So it's not easy. Even Junior Caesara is after I think 30 years old now this season. So he was one of the best players in the last years, and now he's getting older. So they will need to get some fresh air. I don't think they signed enough young players in the last transfer window, but we'll see if they will surprise us and put off a massive European campaign. And this is the next point we can talk about, because we're also in the last years, Başakşehir, they had a better squad than now, and they didn't have good campaigns at all. Last year they lost against Burnley in summer, and the coach Abdullah Avci, I think he lost. They draw at home, and then they lost 1-0 away in overtime against Burnley. That was a massive delusion because that happened in the qualifying of Europa League in the summer. So they didn't even have a proper campaign then, and they didn't even manage to win the league, even though they didn't have matching during the week. So that was quite a shame for them. And at the same time, in the season before, they lost a very good Champions League campaign, because they beat Bruges and they lost against Sevilla in the last minutes of a match. They had a post hit by Emre Belözoğlu, or they would have had the chance to eliminate Sevilla. That would have been a massive, massive win for them. But they lost at the same, quite also deservedly, because Sevilla was a big team, and they managed to get to an easy Europa League group, but they were eliminated by Ludogorets, and that was also pretty bad. campaign. The coach Abdullah Avdi was highly criticized because he fielded like a kind of second team and not a starting 11. I still think that was an input by like the management that wanted to win the league. But as many football observers know, this usually is a tactic that backlashes, because it's like when you play a team, you need the team to win, and wins, they bring other victories, they bring other wins. So this mindset brought Başakşehir to a very bad European campaign and also to a very bad league ending in the end, because Beşiktaş managed to win also that league. So this is like this has been a lot of time with Başakşehir in Europe, and with their performances not being at the best level.
Yeah.
So this season is also a year zero for that.
So yeah, you spoke about them not taking Europa League too serious before because they were prioritizing the title. But this year it doesn't really look very likely that Başakşehir will be a serious contender for the championship, because there's Galatasaray, who bought a lot of really good players. They have a great squad. They're not playing great football as of yet, but that may improve. Fenerbahce are playing really good football. They have a good squad. Trabzonspor are playing really good football. They have a good squad. And Beşiktaş have a good squad, but their football isn't where it needs to be yet, perhaps. But there's definitely 4 other teams that are vying for the title. Do you think Başakşehir will take the Europa League more seriously this time around? Will they put in more of an effort? And how do you see their chances in a group with AS Roma, Borussia Mönchengladbach and Wolfsberger from Austria? How do you think the final standings what do you think the final standings will look like in this group?
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because I think they will arrive third, but I am waiting, because it depends also on their opponents. It depends especially on clubs like Roma that are used to win matches and to have a great history behind, but it's like a year zero also for Roma, because they have a new coach, they have new players. So if they underestimate Başakşehir, they can have a lot of problems, because Okan Buruk knows a lot about Italian football because he played in Italy. So he studies AS Roma quite well, I believe. So he's ready for that match, and that match would be really important for Başakşehir. They are facing Cengiz Ünder, one of their former players. So all the club will be very motivated for Başakşehir against Roma, which is not the same case for AS Roma against Başakşehir, if you know what I mean. So basically it's also depending. I believe Başakşehir will struggle against Mönchengladbach even more, because that's a very dynamic and soft-paced team. And Başakşehir will need to have the same concentration against Wolfsberger, or even some negative surprises can come. But I don't see Başakşehir going through. I hope they will surprise me and take Europa League seriously. But even though they take Europa League seriously, their team has many problems, and the squad is getting older. So they will need a little bit of a miracle to get through, in my opinion. But football is an entertaining game, and it always surprises, especially Europa League. It's interesting. So if Wolfsberger managed to get a win and to take out some points from Roma and Mönchengladbach, that can get interesting, I believe. But I don't see Başakşehir going through. That's my opinion, at least. I see Mönchengladbach winning the group, which may be a surprise. At the second place, I see AS Roma, and the third place, I see Başakşehir, and the fourth place, I see Wolfsberger.
And you already spoke a little bit about Okan Buruk, and you spoke a lot about his predecessor, Abdullah Avci. And the coaches are similar, but does Okan Buruk play the exact same style, or how does he have his team play? What can AS Roma, Mönchengladbach, Wolfsberger, what can they expect from Başakşehir, you think, in terms of tactical approach? And that basically.
Well, one of the few things they have in common is the the tactics, at least the 4-2-3-1, which is what they're following. But their approach is a bit different, because Okan Buruk is a bit less defensive, maybe, sometimes their team are like a bit more open in playing. That gives the opponents a bit more space and chances to score. But at the same time, his team, especially Rizespor, and in a few years ago also Gaziantepspor, they were pretty nice to watch. But Okan still needs to do a few steps in his career to be at the level of Abdullah Avcı, because what Abdullah Avcı did like 3 years ago, 2 and 3 years ago, is not still seen with Okan Buruk's Başakşehir. It's fair to say that also Abdullah Avcı took him at least 1 year to get at that level, and that Başakşehir that was playing great football against Club Brugge is probably the best version of Başakşehir ever, and one of the best Turkish teams if we just think about playing style in the last years. So Okan still needs to get at that level, I believe, but he has the ideas. He played abroad, which is something not really common into Turkish managers. He played in Italy, where tactics have a huge importance, and so he learned a lot about tactics. He was playing in an Inter that was one of the best teams in the last 20 years of football, even though they didn't win a league. But that Inter team was full of also players like Daniele Adani, that now is one of the best pundits in Italy at Sky Italy, and he has an incredible tactical knowledge. And all that players that came from that Inter, including also Emre Belözoğlu, they have like an incredible knowledge. If we think about also Almeida, that was a friend with Daniele Adani, is now a successful manager. If we talk about like Latin American football, so it's pretty interesting, because that team had something different from the other Italian teams I've been following in the last years. So I believe that that experience left a lot on Okan Buruk, and he can get what he learned there and now apply it as a team that finally has a little bit less pressure, because when you are like a manager of Rizespor, it's different. But now he's a manager of Başakşehir. He doesn't have the fans expecting to win every single weekend, and he can have the time to build his squad. I think this is like a year zero, so that's not, I don't think the best football will come out this season. But next season things might get interesting if Okan will have the chance to work on a long term, because he can in potential get even on a higher level than Abdullah Avcı. At the moment he still needs to prove a little bit more, but his team is slowly improving. Last match day before the national team break, the team was starting to play better. Still, it's relying a little bit too much on Edin Visca, which is still the most fundamental player of the team. And if he performs badly, as we saw against Olympiacos, Başakşehir don't have chances. So yeah, that's what I think.
And Başakşehir had a poor start to the season, of course, as you already alluded to. They lost twice to Olympiacos in the Champions League qualifiers, which got them into the Europa League group stages. Now, of course, they directly went into the groups. They didn't have to play any more qualifiers. But they also lost their opening 2 matches of the season. Their first one against Yeni Malatyaspor was a 3-0 loss. İrfan Can Kahveci, one of their key players in midfield, getting sent off in that one. He also got sent off against Olympiacos. And then on the second match day, they lost at a time in the 4th minute of stoppage time against Fenerbahce at home. So they started with 0 points in the first 2 matches, and then of course they had a very late winner against Gençlerbirliği, who are currently bottom of the Turkish Super League. But before we finalize this, Bruno, one more thing. You mentioned it earlier. You lived in Istanbul for a year, and traveling to Başakşehir was a bit of a task if you came from the historic center of the city, where most people will go for sightseeing and touristy kind of stuff. But for the AS Roma and the Mönchengladbach and maybe the Wolfsberger fans who decide to make the trip to Istanbul, in a short way, is there anything you can say? Go and see that, go and try that. This will be a fun experience for you.
Well, I would like to tell them that Başakşehir is nice, but it's not like that actually. So they would need to stay in Istanbul, and to if they stay 1 or 2 days, it's like the old city stuff is still very good. I would recommend them to, of course, Hagia Sophia is like the best thing to see and to witness. But if you have time, also watch and have the chance to go into the Suleiman Mosque. Because I had the chance just this summer to go there, and I was like cursing against myself because I didn't go there in all the time I was also living there, because that's the best mosque I think in Istanbul. And if you're like looking for nightlife or stuff, just forget about Başakşehir, stay in Ortaköy and enjoy life and what brings life to you. Just also forget about the easiness of moving around quite easily, because Istanbul is quite chaotic and full of traffic, but it's the best city in the world. So we have the chance as European human beings to have this incredible bridge between Europe and Asia, and that's not rhetoric, it's a truth that is just staying there at 3 hours of flight from home. So this is a chance for everyone to go there and enjoy a great city. And aside from the couple of hours you will spend in Başakşehir to watch the match, even though it's a very good stadium, it's a good stadium to watch football, I believe, but you're not going to have a dangerous match, maybe against very heated fans like you can have in Galatasaray or Beşiktaş or Fenerbahçe. You're not gonna have any danger, any clash with the other fan groups, because Başakşehir will have just a few fans, I believe. So if you have like the chance to go there to Istanbul for this match, just do it and just go, because even though it takes quite a while to go to Başakşehir, the things you can see in just even one day in Istanbul, Galata Tower, Suleiman Mosque or Hagia Sophia, and having a night in some place in Ortaköy or Beşiktaş, that can be quite enough to see and to experience. So just do it and enjoy it, because this is a great city.
Thank you, Bruno Bottaro of The Zone Italy. You can follow Bruno on Twitter. His handle will be in the show notes. With pot 4's Wolfsberger from Austria, and joining us right now is Martin Shauhuber from Der Standard. He's the editor of Der Standard in Austria. Martin, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your insights on Wolfsberger, who are probably an unknown for many European football fans.
Yes, thank you. Happy to talk to you.
And I made a case out of pointing out every single time I spoke about Wolfsberger to say not Wolfsburg from Germany. It is rather confusing. It's a very similar name, of course. But let's get into it. How did Wolfsberger manage to qualify for the Europa League group stage? First, tell us a little bit about their season in Austria last year, and then, of course, their qualifying campaign going into the UEFA Europa League group stages.
Well, they sort of stumbled into it in a way. Red Bull Salzburg has been doing so well internationally that we ended up with a direct qualification spot for the third in the league, which honestly is just more than Austria should have in terms of how strong their teams are. And last season, as it is in many seasons, the teams that should be fighting for the third spot, they just all messed it up. Those are the teams that people are going to know: Rapid Vienna, Austria Vienna, Sturm Graz. They all had very chaotic seasons. And there were only basically 3 teams all season that played good football from week 1 to week 33. And Wolfsburg, we don't call them Wolfsberger, we call them Wolfsberger BAC. Wolfsburg was just one of those 3 teams. Of course, much worse than Red Bull Salzburg and Las Glint, but they were comfortably in third, and they just, even until the end of the season, people just couldn't catch up to them. So now they had their first good season in a long time, and they just got that direct qualification spot, which nobody could have expected at the beginning of the year. Their former coach played a big role in that. Because he had his system, he let that system play, it was consistent, and it worked. And yeah, that's how they ended up playing in the Europa League.
Yeah, and of course, Beşiktaş fans and Turkish football fans in general will very much remember the big scare LASK gave Beşiktaş last season in the Europa League qualifiers, where I think a 4-minute stoppage time goal from Alvaro Negredo had to service to get Beşiktaş even into the group stages, because LASK were overwhelming them in Austria. So again, an opponent not to be underestimated coming out of pot 4. It could be a dangerous position, like you just pointed out, Martin. Of course, they're not at that same level of LASK, but if you underestimate these types of teams, that's when you get in trouble. Let's talk a little bit about their key players. Who make Wolfsberger a team to watch out for? Who are the key players for Wolfsberger? Who should Başakşehir, Mönchengladbach, and AS Roma fear?
Well, I would say it's two guys, but by far the most important one is Sean Weissman, the Israeli striker. They got him on a free transfer in the summer, and I honestly do not know how anybody gets him on a free transfer and how it's Wolfsberg who gets him on a free transfer. He scored 9 goals in 7 games so far, and it's not like he's just been getting easy goals. He's just a very good football player, and he's sort of an all-around striker, like physically strong, but he can also just play football. Dangerous when crosses come in. Yeah, he's like, at work, the sentence "he's too good for this team" has been said a lot. And I don't know if it's maybe just a lucky streak for him, because obviously we've only seen him play for a month, but that month was very convincing. And then there is Michael Lindl. He's the playmaker. He's the number 10. He has lots of experience. Has played in Germany for a long time. Has played for good Austrian teams as well, other good Austrian teams. And their game runs through him. Like, he drops far. He drops, pretty far, I would say, for a number 10, just to get the ball. And he is also really dangerous when it comes to free kicks, like this kind of 1 or 2 step run up free kick from just outside the box. That's his thing. And then I would say that's all the key players, because this is how Wolfsburg is constructed. There's not just 4 or 5 key players. It's just the team is the key player, sort of. It's unusual for them to have a striker like Weissman that's so outstanding now.
Yeah, and let's talk about the system then. Coach Gerhard Struber, how does he have his team play? How does he organize his squad? And what makes the team such a good, cohesive, collective unit, so to speak?
Well, if Beşiktaş fans remember the games against LASK, they know how WRC plays, because it's very similar. Their coach is Gerhard Struber, and he's a Red Bull guy from head to toe. He's been coaching in the Red Bull Academy for a long time. Then he was coaching at Liefering. Before that, he was the assistant coach for Red Bull Salzburg for a short time. Basically, he's been through the whole Red Bull system, and I guess that's well known because Red Bull Salzburg has played it on a very high level. It's this very intense pressing and quick attacks. Of course, with Wolfsburg, there is less offense involved in the whole system than it would be with Salzburg, but it's really just this intense pressing. And then a lot with Wolfsburg goes over the wings. That's maybe the biggest difference to how Salzburg does it. And you just don't want to play them. But the problem is, or what will be a problem for them with the system they play, is first of all, if you have good defenders, you run a lot of empty kilometers. Or if the opponent has good defenders, they just make you run. And they don't have a lot of guys. And this is an intense thing, and you cannot do this twice with the same guys every week. And I think that's going to be by far the biggest problem in the group stages.
So that's both the strengths and weaknesses in a way. But
Exactly.
Are there any other weakness that you can highlight? Maybe something that Roma, Mönchengladbach, and Başakşehir will want to look to exploit?
Well, their defenders are not super fast, especially the central defenders. But that would sort of be their strength otherwise. Like, they don't have a big significant weakness. This is why they succeed in the league in Austria. But I would say financials. Like, they just didn't have the money to invest in roster depth at all. So, and they should not have done it because, yeah, if you don't have the money, you shouldn't spend it. We have learned that the hard way. Yeah, and I would really say that this is by far the biggest weakness. And even if just one guy gets injured, they cannot cover for that.
So squad depth is definitely an issue.
Definitely.
And we can see also, I mean, obviously, I always say transfer market data when it comes to transfer value and stuff like that should be taken with a pinch of salt. But it is an indication. For example, here in this group, AS Roma are top with more than 412 million in total market value. Then Mönchengladbach with 257, then a huge drop off already to Başakşehir, who are only at 60 million, and then there's Wolfsberger, who are almost at 12 million. So there's a huge gap in terms of market value, finances. Obviously, AS Roma are a massive club. Borussia Mönchengladbach are a big club in Germany too, with a fantastic fan base and all that. So it's in terms of that, you would think Wolfsberger will finish in 4th place. They're the obvious candidate for that. But as you just pointed out, they're a difficult team to play against. They could surprise you, like we saw with last season against Beşiktaş. And of course, LASK, I believe, eliminated Basel this season in the Champions League playoffs. Yes. So yeah, this football school that is coming out of Red Bull Salzburg, because if I'm not mistaken, I spoke to one of Laola One's journalists last season about LASK, and he pointed out, I believe the coach was also from the Red Bull Salzburg Academy. Yes. So that's a similar system they're trying to play. A very difficult style of football, especially when you go into those matches expecting an easy win. So let's get your thoughts on this group. How will it finish? Who will end top? Who will end 2nd, 3rd, and 4th? And how do you expect Wolfsberger to come along in this group? Will you think that they will be able to get many points in this group and surprise some opponents?
So there's 2 unknowns for me in this. First of all, Başakşehir is a bit of an unknown for me. Of course, the roster looks nice, but I don't think they're going to be that good, really. And I think that's a really hard question for Wolfsburg, is how much are they going to throw the league? Because if they just let their 13th to 24th guys play in the league, I would see they could easily compete for a 3rd spot in the group, but I don't think they're going to do it. You don't want to get relegated and then be like 3rd in Europa League, but be 11th in the league because of that. So I think they're going to let their key guys play in the league as well. And if they do that, they're going to be last in the Europa League stages. But I do think they're going to take points in more than one game.
Yeah, and Başakşehir are, of course, a little bit of an unknown. Sorry to interrupt you, but they actually used to play a very similar style than the style you described, with Abdullah Avcı as their coach, but he just left. He went to Beşiktaş. Now Okan Buruk is in place. He has a more offensive philosophy, but they have had a very poor start to the season. Of course, went out against Olympiacos, and then now in the league they only got their first win after 2 losses in the opening 2 match days. So I would not be surprised for Wolfsberger to upset them, if I'm honest, especially from hearing what you're telling us.
Also, if you're saying they play an offensive style, that's what Wolfsburg wants, basically. And this is also why I feel like I just see Wolfsburg being able to take points off Borussia, for example, just because of how they play. And because Wolfsburg, like Borussia, is very similar to Red Bull Salzburg now, with Marco Rose having gone there. The Salzburg's coach from last year. So Wolfsburg knows how to play them, and they played Salzburg very well this season already. So I just see them like getting a draw at home or something.
So it definitely won't be an easy task for the teams to beat them. So who do you think will end the top in the group?
Well, I think it's going to be Roma, but just because I feel like maybe they're going to take it serious for once. Maybe I'm wrong with that, and it's just going to be Borussia again, but I'd say Roma, Borussia, Başakşehir, I'd say in that order.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Martin. Now,
You're
do you
welcome.
have any travel tips for fans of AS Roma, Borussia Mönchengladbach, or maybe Başakşehir that decide to make the trip to Austria? Anything they have to do when they're in town there?
Yeah, first of all, you're lucky you don't have to go to Wolfsburg, actually. I should tell that small episode because it's amazing. It tells you everything you need to know about Austrian sports. We built a huge stadium in Carinthia, which is the region where Wolfsburg is, for the Euros. It's a huge stadium, and there's no first league team that plays there. So it's basically just standing there. And now would be a very good occasion, finally, to have significant games there. The problem is there's a forest in the stadium right now, because nobody expected Wolfsburg to qualify for international competition. So there's an art project for 2 or 3 months now, where somebody put freaking trees inside the stadium and they couldn't get out of the contract. Which means Wolfsburg has to play in Graz, where Sturm Graz usually plays. So people have to go to Graz, and if they go there, like, it's just a nice city, it's a student city. Just eat a lot, drink a lot, party. Don't mess anything up because Graz is nice. That's really everything I would say. Take time to also visit some countryside spots, but not if it's November. Then it's just terrible. Don't go if it's November.
So there's trees in the stadium.
There is trees in. It's not Wolfsburger's stadium because their stadium is just way too small for Europa League. But this huge stadium in Klagenfurt, which is just a beautiful. It's the best stadium we have in Austria. Nobody can use it because it's in the wrong spot. And there are trees in the stadium. It is you could not make this up. It's everything that's wrong about Austria.
That's hilarious. It's the best anecdote I've heard throughout all these interviews. That's absolutely hilarious. Well, Martin, thank you very much for giving us your insights and your fun travel tips and an amazing anecdote there at the end. And thank you all for listening to our UEFA Europa League preview for Group J in the UEFA Europa League. Please check the show notes for all our guests of today and give them a follow on Twitter. And don't forget to check out our previous episode on the Europa League Group C, which includes Trabzonspor. Of course, that one dropped last week. Stay tuned for our Group K preview, which includes Beşiktaş. Remember, that one pops up on the Black Eagles podcast feed, not the Football Ala Turca podcast feed. And then finally, at the end of the week, in the weekend, we will drop our Galatasaray preview for Group C of the Champions League, which of course includes big hitters such as Paris Saint-Germain and the 13-time UEFA Champions League winners, Real Madrid. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Football Ala Turca. Check out the show notes, share with your friends and family, spread the word of Football Ala Turca, help the show grow. And we'll see you again sooner rather than later, as we of course still have a transfer episode coming up this week too, which is yet to be recorded. But I believe we're recording that tonight. On Monday, we'll be talking about the big transfers in the Super League this summer. And boy, there's quite a lot to talk about. Of course, Radamel Falcao, Daniel Sturridge, Luis Gustavo, George Kevin Nkudu, Mohamed El Neni, Steven Nzonzi. There's just so much to talk about in terms of transfers. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to get it all in one episode, but that's what we're doing this week. So you're still getting a Beşiktaş Europa League preview on the Black Eagles podcast feed, a Galatasaray Champions League preview on the Football Ala Turca podcast feed, and then of course our transfer episode. So plenty to listen to this week. Please subscribe on iTunes or on Google Play or wherever you're listening to podcasts. Drop us a review. 5 stars is always appreciated. Helps the show quite a lot. And of course, like I said in the intro, go to www.patreon.com/Falt, F-A-L-T, if you would like to support the podcast through other means. Thank you all for listening, and see you later.